I want to ask you about whether Britain has a sort of threshold in terms of standards of accommodation as a civilised country. Is it wrong, even if someone's entered the country illegally, for them to be accommodated in a tented camp?
Really good question. I remember not that long ago, Andrea Jenkins, the Lincolnshire-based mayor, suggesting tents. And let me be truthful, I sort of did a bit of a sharp intake of breath, because it certainly wasn't official Reform Party policy. And I was sort of thinking, crikey, that's going to set the cat amongst the pigeons. But look, I think probably on reflection, if we have to have asylum seekers coming at all, I mean, and I should say that, of course, the UK should provide safe haven for a very well selected group of people who genuinely are fleeing war and terror. That's what civilized countries do. Yeah. They take their share. But we all know that that is not what the vast majority of people who are coming here are really now doing. They are economic opportunists, certainly. That is the overwhelming evidence, I think. I think that if you are coming over here genuinely fleeing war and terror, you're probably going to be okay with a short period in a tented camp. But I just don't really like the idea of Britain becoming a kind of sea of refugee camps. You know, this isn't Sudan. You know, and I sort of feel that that is not a good look for our country. And it would be all right if we could trust this government to only have, you know, one very, very small and very civilized encampment. I mean, after all, the army during the Afghanistan war lived in something similar. Camp Bastion was basically an encampment, and it was pretty civilized. Yeah. But we can't trust them not to expand these camps anywhere and everywhere. You know, coming to a place near you, a refugee camp. I mean, marvellous. You know, this isn't actually the third world, though quite often I wonder whether bits of it feel like it.
Oh, we are turning into a third world country, honestly. We're deliberately impovering ourselves with net zero, even though we're sitting on decades worth of oil and gas. We have a welfare state that is absolutely unaffordable. We live beyond our means. And at some point, it's all going to fall over, Isabel. I do worry that in 4 years' time, when there is a major political shift, and who knows what that will look like, that's up to my viewers and listeners to decide. But I'm a bit worried that the country will be so broken by then, there's not much they can do, because if you're going to have a political revolution, if you're going to change our institutions, if you're going to close the border and all of those things, you need political will, but you need resource as well. Donald Trump's absolutely broken the bank, Isabel, in order to police the southern border and to close the southern border. It's costing tens of billions of dollars to do so, which is why he asked for so much extra cash this time round. But listen, what I want to do now is I want to get onto another subject, because speaking of the economy, Isabel, inflation is up. We know that. Growth is down. 16,000 millionaires expected to leave the country this year. We've also got, you know, stubborn inflation, which has crept up as well. And now the latest, our borrowing costs have reached the highest level in 27 years. Labour are in for 4 years, and it could be a very tumultuous 4 years, couldn't it?
I mean, this is just absolutely catastrophic, and you know, I've long felt not enough people are talking about it. You know, I suppose because it's boring to talk about the bond markets and inflation and so on, but it really matters, and I'm sure that most of our listeners will actually be noticing food prices rising. The inflation is heavily driven by food prices, and I'm certainly seeing it in the shops at the moment. There are a few things, aren't there, that are always a sort of barometer, and they'll be different for every family. But for me, it's butter. It's just right back up again, that packet of Lurpak, which probably is a bit of a luxury, but it's a good gauge of inflation, and it's rocketing back up again. You know, we don't want to be spending so much of our precious resources simply on paying interest on government borrowing. It's a very, very bad use of things. And, you know, I'm really worried, Mark, by the way, about this prospect of Rachel Reeves now coming for our homes. I mean, we're not just talking squillionaire homes here. The suggestion is that she's going to come after primary residences. So if you sell your house, up until, well, to date, it has been the case that you're not going to get taxed capital gains on the increase in value since when you bought it and what you sold it for, because it's your home, and that was kind of considered off limits. I am very worried by the rumours that she's looking to lift that exemption and that people are going to have to pay capital gains on the uplift in their own home. I think that massively crosses a line. I think it'll have horrendous unintended consequences, and it is just going to play havoc with the property market and drive yet more people either overseas or just into renting. You know, just going to stagnate the economy.
Isabel, can I offer you briefly a devil's advocate position on behalf of this government? And it's, I've forgotten now, 13, 14 years that the Tories were in? A 14 years. So they presided over the open borders, the illegal immigration, the Boris wave, of course, signing up for net zero. That was Theresa May's triumph, even though she was warned by her Chancellor, Philip Hammond, that it would cost, wait for it, £1 trillion. A trillion, had a T at the beginning of it, and apparently she's a Conservative. So you've got the migrant crisis, net zero, and a very flatlining economy, a COVID overreaction, all as a result of the Tories. Do you have any sympathy for Rachel Reeves and for Keir Starmer, who have essentially won the booby prize here by being in power?
Absolutely none, because your point is the one you made at the beginning, is the 14 years. I mean, they've had all this time to prepare a master plan for how they're going to take us to dizzy new heights of success and happiness. And at each and every step, they have done the precise opposite of what would make this country safer, more secure, and a happier place. And I am genuinely staggered at the levels of incompetence and lack of understanding of how people are feeling. And, you know, I think these conversations are going on in every sitting room, round every kitchen table, in every pub. And these are conversations that people who never wanted anything to do with politics are having. And it is, how the hell do we go on 4 more years like this? And what state will the country be in 4 years' time? And if I could just finally pick up on the last caller who was predicting, I fear quite correctly, that the government will find some way to overrule this interim judgment on migrant hotels. But there is one upside to that, which is it will put them in an even worse political position to actually be fighting, ironically, to keep migrant hotels open, which is the opposite of what they said they would do. So even if they do that, this ruling is a win-win for the people, because it's going to make the government look ridiculous whichever way it plays out. And more ridiculous they look, the more likely we are to be able to get rid of them sooner.
But briefly, maintaining my devil's advocate position, Isabel, if you look at the hike on national insurance contributions for employers, that was required because they had to spend around £50 billion in the NHS to tackle those waiting lists. So, I mean, I think it was a terrible policy. I think they weren't honest before the election when they said we won't raise income tax, national insurance and VAT. They probably should have just said, look, the country's broke, nothing's off the table. They painted themselves into the corner. They've punished business, which obviously affects the workers and kills the economy. So I agree the budget, the October budget, was a horror show. But it was a horror show partly to get waiting lists down in the NHS and to settle pay disputes that had to be settled eventually. You know, does Rachel Reeves not have a position of defence there? I mean, for example, would you not have spent the extra money in the NHS?
No, I wouldn't have, because I don't accept you need to spend billions more making the NHS more effective. I mean, I spent best part of 2 years examining the state of the NHS, and I could give you any number of things that could be done to produce a better quality service, better outcomes for less money. I mean, the scale of waste in the NHS is something we've all known about for a long time, and trust me, is absolutely off the chart. But look, this actually begins and ends with the welfare budget. That is the single biggest drag on the economy. It is absolutely out of control. You know, you look at something like the whole Motability scheme, totally discredited. Something like 1 in 5 new cars are for the Motability scheme. This is insane. We're not a nation of people all hobbling around totally disabled or in wheelchairs. It is completely and utterly abused from top to bottom, and yet it's still going. You know, they know that it's abused and it's still functioning. Just one example. £1 billion every month given in welfare to foreign nationals. Again, madness. We could go on and on listing what's going on with the welfare budget. The long and the short is, I am not cutting Rachel Reeves any slack, any excuses. I think that this has just been so badly mismanaged right from the start.
Powerful words there from Isabel Oakeshott.